My guest today is the lead writer on the Book of Extinction.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to be better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Okay, I have an amazing interview coming right up. But first, if you need some help running your tabletop RPGs, you're in luck. I create resource books that help game masters do just that. You can find them at DiceGeeks.com, DriveThruRPG.com, and Amazon.com. Just search for the Book of Random Tables. I create random tables that help game masters cut down their prep time and have more fun at the gaming table. All right, here's today's interview. My guest today is the host of Making a Monster podcast, as well as the lead writer on Book of Extinction, Lucas Zellers. Lucas, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Matt, it's good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fun to have a returning guest once again on the podcast. We had a great conversation in our first episode about kind of your beginnings in the tabletop RPG space area industry, whatever it can be called, I guess. So listeners, if they haven't heard that, can go back and check out that episode. I'll try to include a link in the show notes of this episode to that first one so they can learn more about you. Well, since we have already covered a lot of that stuff, I just want to jump into kind of what's going on nowadays. You are, as I mentioned, the host of Making a Monster podcast. And why don't you just tell us the premise of the podcast really quickly, just so we can have a little context. And then I want to know what you've been learning about tabletop role-playing game monsters.
Woof. Okay. Well, Making a Monster is the often surprising history behind the monsters that we know and that we are making for tabletop role-playing games. So I have found that every monster is a portal to thousands of years of cultural history and storytelling and the way we talk about the enemy, other, and the villain in the story. And it has been a really surprising journey of discovering way more importance in a very silly topic than I ever thought would be there. So I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and it has grown and evolved quite a bit since the December 2020 conversation that we have. I was a little nervous to go back and listen to that episode again. I'm not sure if it holds up, because almost every couple of episodes, someone tells me something that completely revolutionizes my understanding of those topics. And I think that's just the way that the TTRPG industry in general, like, that's the kind of people it attracts, people who think deeply about those things. So it's been a fantastic conversation to have, a fantastic line of inquiry to pursue over the past couple of years. Yeah.
And so, thousands of years of cultural history. So we can just cover that like in just a couple minutes before we move on.
Sure. Yeah. We'll be real quick about it.
Yeah. We can just cover that really fast. Well, so that is really fascinating. I think you're absolutely right. I think people who are drawn to tabletop role-playing games, we tend to think deeply about topics that we're interested in. And so I think that's awesome. I think that's great. And so maybe you can just give us a window into, maybe not the full section of thousands of years or something, but what are some things that stand out to you that you've been learning that, in your own games or for game masters that you're learning about monsters that they can kind of put in their games? Yeah.
Well, my major point in the first episode that I came back, the first time I was here, was the monster first in game design. And I still believe in that point. Mm-hmm. Although, like I said, my understanding has grown. I listened to your episode with Sandy Peterson about the way he put together Call of Cthulhu, which was a fantastic story. And he talked about having the mechanics first in some games and the theme first in some games. My understanding of tabletop role-playing games began with Dungeons and Dragons, for whom the monster is often the very first place an adventure or an encounter starts. Like, you can open up the monster manual to a random page and run about 2 hours of satisfying gameplay with no other source books or prior knowledge, which I think is fantastic. Trying to condense storytelling into a package that concise and that relatable is a real skill. So that's kind of what attracted me to it. And I've just been talking to people who design games either as a hobby or for a living, and especially games that aren't Dungeons and Dragons specifically. So I think one of the opinions that I have now that I didn't have before I started the podcast was, I really hate goblins. And I think this is if you get this, if this turns your crank, then you're really going to enjoy the show. Goblins are the thing that you hit with a sword, or that you jump on their head and they explode into coins or experience points or whatever, because goblins are the point at which storytelling and game design intersect. They're almost always the level 1 bad guy. And as such, there's a lot of things that we need them to do that they didn't need to do before they became a part of games. So if you look at the way goblins are treated in fairy stories and, that kind of literature, they often function very differently than the way goblins work in tabletop role-playing games. Or if you've played Lost Mines of Phandelver, the first encounter is a goblin ambush. And, for that reason, goblins have become incredibly disappointing to me, because I know what they're capable of. I know the stories that they can tell, the rich history that they can unlock, and the meaning that they can carry. Ways of telling each other how to interact with strangers and what to do and what not to do. And how, looking at the way people who told those stories, what they coded into what goblins were and the morals that they carried. And then, you flip the page in D&D and it's like, these are worth some experience points. And once you fight them, then you can fight something more interesting. So my beef has always been, no. Make goblins interesting. They're fascinating. They always have been. And they only became boring when we made them a piece of a game. And it was going to happen to something. It just happened to be goblins. So here we are.
Well, yeah. And that's interesting because I think that is something that happens in games when you gamify something, right? Because I've read the story, right, of how Strahd was created, and that was created because the author was sitting in a session and they're going through a dungeon, and a vampire walked around the corner, and the party hit it, right, and it died, and it gave them some experience points and some gold pieces or whatever. And I believe the author said, like driving home was like, that's not what a vampire is. Vampires are dangerous things, right? They are deadly, complex, monsters and creatures or whatever. And so that's how we got Strahd, right? Because it was like, no, a vampire just doesn't run around the corner and give you whatever 200 experience points or whatever the scale was back in the day.
Somebody trying to engage deeply with the genre and the expectations that it brought to the table and the experience that it promised to the players.
Yeah. And I think that can be done actually with a lot of monsters, that you can take some that you think are just boring and simple and really add some extra dimensions to them. I know in one episode when I interviewed the Monster Professor, we talked
Josh Woods. I was hoping you'd mention him.
Yeah,
good guy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've recorded another episode with him just recently. It was going to go live here. It'll be live when this one goes live. By the time this one goes live, it'll already be out there. But in one of our earlier episodes, we talked, I asked Josh, the Monster Professor, how do you make goblins fun? And he suggested looking at Gremlins and Gremlins 2 and kind of modeling them off of that, as because if you met those creatures, you would not be bored. Now, that's not necessarily a classical treatment of them or something, but you would not be bored if you ran into, creatures that were like in the Gremlins movies. You would certainly not be bored with goblins.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do with making a monster is give you the tools to be able to do that kind of thing and have more interesting and meaningful interactions with the monsters specifically in your games.
Yeah. No, I think that's great because, again, like you said, usually we can just open the monster manual, pick a creature, and we have a game, right?
Yep.
We just have a game. And I do think, and kind of be fair too, though, I think sometimes, game masters or dungeon masters, we have so much on our plate, right? That sometimes it's just like, our players might just say, "Oh, those goblins were kind of boring." And you're like, "Look, man, I can make like 3 things interesting, but that 4th thing, I just couldn't do it anymore." Right?
Yeah, always within the bounds of realism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's just so I think sadly sometimes that falls into it. It's just like, why weren't the goblins interesting? I just didn't have time. I just needed I rolled an encounter, you attack them. You used a couple spell slots and some, HP, and now we're moving on.
Well, and one of the other surprising things that I learned was that it's okay for monsters not to be morally gray and intellectually challenging. Like at some point, there is catharsis does have a role in the story. It's part of the function of the game and why we play it. So I had to kind of begin to hold those expectations and those desires of really big, challenging monsters on multiple levels. I had to hold them loosely. Now that I'm 2 years into this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. That sometimes you just need a villain, right? And and it can be interesting to explore those gray areas, and sometimes, obviously, in maybe parody or something, it can be funny, right?
Yes. But at some point, I just want someone to shout "fools" and then blast a henchman. Like that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more, right? We don't shed a tear over the stormtroopers that fall down the shaft, right?
Yeah.
Like we just don't shed a tear, right? We don't, but in the parody or this, you cut to the home and like there's a wife, like, and a kid or something, and you're like, when's dad coming home or something? And we're like, oh no.
What's the expression? Tragedy is a close up and comedy is a wide shot.
Yes. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So no, I absolutely agree. Sometimes we just need that black and white. We need the villain, and we're going to attack the goblins, and that's the way it goes. And no, I couldn't agree more with that. And and sometimes maybe after, a hard day at work or whatever, we're not looking to explore gray areas anymore.
Yeah.
Something we want to stand up for what's right. And and
a straightforward choice, unlike many of the rest that I have made today.
Absolutely.
That I can solve by hitting it with a club.
Yes. Yes. And it's all resolved and everything's fine.
Yes.
Yes. No. And I think
fine.
Yes.
Like, so sometimes that's fine.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And especially, in a game space or something like that, I think, that's fine. I mean, what do we do with video games, right? We do the same thing with a video game. We're not, Call of Duty, we're not really worried about, the other people in the server or whatever, right?
We're just, part of the whole journey of the podcast has been to figure out at what points is it fine and at what points does it become not fine? Because that line can be difficult to discern, but
sure.
I think figuring out where it is and finding out what the criteria are have been the reason I still have a show for 2 years now.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. And like we said at the beginning, I think people who are into tabletop role-playing games do want to think about these things because we're thinking about history and culture and literature and mythology. And we can just pat ourselves on the back, Lucas, because people in our hobby are intelligent, right? They're intelligent, thoughtful people.
I'm not pandering at all.
No.
To all of the uniformly smart people who are listening.
Absolutely. And including ourselves, right? We're all intelligent, smart people who are, who are thinking deeply about history and culture and all. Oh, well, just having a little fun here, but that is interesting, and I would encourage everybody to give Making a Monster a listen. I know the episodes that I have checked out have been really fascinating. A lot of interesting conversations with a lot of game designers and people who are truly thinking deeply about a lot of these subjects. So a lot of interesting stuff over there.
Well, thanks, man. I'm glad you listened.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. I'm not a regular listener, but I have listened to about 5 or 6 episodes, and
That's fine.
they were all
short.
really good.
I have a lot of binge. I have a lot of binge listeners because you can take care of most of my back catalog in a couple of days.
Yeah. It's a very short podcast, unlike mine.
Something for everyone.
Yes. Yeah. But in addition to Making a Monster, now you have gotten your feet wet a little bit, even a little bit more than the last time we had talked about.
Yeah, imagine that. I started making monsters.
I know, exactly. That's what I was just going to say. You've started making monsters. This is not a great leap for people to take. So I would assume then all this talk about monsters, you just had to start making monsters?
I mean, basically.
All right.
Yeah. And, for all of the things that I had been hearing, all of the designers that I met had a path to this industry that was as unique as mine. And all of them had things that they cared about very deeply and points that they wanted to make. And they had found that the medium of role-playing games was one that was very accommodating to the artistic statement that they had. And I had a thing in mind that I thought really only fantasy role-playing games could handle. And over the course of the last, up until March of 2023, that thing is becoming Book of Extinction.
Mm-hmm. And why don't you tell us a little about the premise of Book of Extinction, and then kind of let us in on the why beyond Making a Monster?
I would be happy to.
All right.
Book of Extinction is a bestiary of extinct animals that we have resurrected for the 5th edition of the world's greatest role-playing game. We took a list of, we're aiming for about 100. We'll see how far we get of animals that have gone extinct, mostly within the modern era, 1500 and forward. And we are taking a look at the true and actual history of how and why that happened. Providing a stat block for the real historical animal, so enshrining it in the language of Dungeons and Dragons. And then on the facing page, we're mythologizing it. We're doing exactly the same kind of work that a culture would normally take all of this time and retelling to do, and creating monsters that are based on the legacy that these extinct animals have left behind.
No, it's really fascinating. It's certainly something I would have never thought of. So I definitely have some questions here.
I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, why undertake extinct animals from our time period and try to make them into monsters?
Yeah, that's a great question. You would think that it would be easier to do endangered animals because, maybe we still have time. But extinction, I think, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, I think extinction is the most pressing biological question of our time. It's the primary way in which we interact with nature. And I think we need to pay more attention to it, or things are going to go very poorly for us in the coming generations. And secondly, I think this is something that's already part of the DNA of fantasy role-playing games in a couple of really surprising and really important ways. So this has been a project that has tried to put its thumb on the place where natural history and mythology meet. And I think that's been a really fascinating and heartbreaking exercise. So there's a lot of reasons for me to do this, and those are kind of the big two.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. And so, maybe just to clarify a little bit, so you're taking animals that have gone extinct, and then you're going to give a stat block for what they really are, but then you're going to create like a fantasy or a mythological version of them as well, so we can fight them.
Yes,
and make them extinct again.
Yeah, well, not
just
quite.
okay, good.
I do get that question a lot, and it is a valid concern because kind of the rhythm of Dungeons and Dragons is you fight the monster, you kill the monster, you take its treasure, you fight a bigger monster. But my experience with the game over the past 7 years or so that I've been playing it has been that people who play this game have a much more multifaceted relationship with their antagonists. A lot of time, maybe this hasn't always been the case, or maybe the common factor in every table that I've played at is me. But my experience has been that we want to ask these kinds of questions. We're willing to talk to the monster. And more importantly, no matter what your experience or your approach to the encounter is, those memories that you make at the table become very important to you. They become almost as real as anything else you experience. And if I can bring you an experience that meaningful and that real with a creature that you wouldn't otherwise have known about, and then let you know that this creature represents an important moment in time or an important thing that we must not allow to happen again, then I have achieved my goal. And I think I truly do think D&D is the right way to do it.
Yeah, no, and that is interesting too, because I think as you were mentioning there, and I was kind of alluding to, sometimes Dungeons and Dragons does get kind of the rap of the player characters are just going around already making monsters or animals extinct, right?
Yeah.
It's
just not a very sustainable way of relating to the dungeon to kill everything in it and pull everything out of it.
Yeah.
But from that basic formula, we've created a game experience that is able to accommodate the kinds of questions that I want to ask it.
Yeah. And I think it is interesting too, when I was looking at your project here, because in some sense, right, I mean, this is what Dungeons and Dragons has been doing all along, right? We pull monsters or creatures or things from our past and bring them into the game. So this is actually not like, a radical thing, even though, like I said, I wouldn't have thought of it myself, I don't think, but it is interesting.
It's one of those hiding in plain sight things. It's something the game has already been doing. The entry that I wrote yesterday was on the elephant bird of Madagascar. It was the largest bird to have ever lived at 1,600 pounds and more than 10 feet tall at a maximum estimate.
What?
I know. But the reason that it's called an elephant bird is not, as you might think, that it is the size of an elephant, or that because it is basically a giant ostrich that it kind of looks like an elephant with a long trunk. No. The reason it's called an elephant bird is because the Arabian Nights and the story of the roc, a bird so massive it could carry elephants off of the plains back to its mountain nests. And because of the accounts of Marco Polo the Venetian, I think in 1298 or thereabouts, we linked that story, that legend, to Madagascar. And the elephant bird was the biggest bird on Madagascar. So we call it an elephant bird because we thought it was the bird that ate elephants that we had been telling stories about for a very long time.
Oh. Well, that is fascinating. And I don't think I had ever heard of the elephant bird. But of course I know the roc. Yeah. That is very interesting. And so, that's just a revival then of the mythology that we already have.
We've been doing this for a very long time. There's a lot of monsters that already are in the monster manual that we think trace their beginnings back to either fossils or sort of traveler stories that grew in the telling. For example, the skulls of elephants have a large central hole in which, to which their trunk affixes, and like that's the nostril. But if you didn't know anything about the inside of an elephant's head, or comparative anatomy, or any of that, you might look at a skull that size and say, well, that is obviously a 15-foot human with one central eye and bad teeth. And that is that's, we think, how we got the story of the Cyclops on the Greek islands of Crete.
Yeah, I've heard that one before, and that is really fascinating. Before we leave the elephant bird, though, just thinking as a player, can I ride it? That's, is it a mount? There you go.
Probably. I've given a stat for the actual elephant bird, and it is a large beast, unaligned, fairly unremarkable. In comparison to something like an axe beak that D&D already has. But if you were to encounter my mythological version, the Vorupatra, I think you could ride it, but I don't think you would want to. It's firmly in the gargantuan size category.
Okay.
It is 120 feet of speed. So if you get on top of this thing, your friends are never going to see you again. Make different life plans if you ride the elephant bird, because you are not coming back.
Well, I had to ask, because if I introduce this into my gaming group, somebody's going to try to ride the thing. That's all I know.
Will try to ride it. I mean, riding ostriches has got to be fun.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yes. I've seen some clips of people trying to ride ostriches, and it doesn't usually end well. So that is
that is a game night well spent.
Yes. Absolutely. But yeah, so I'll try to refrain from kind of going playing the player tropes of players who just want to like derail everything or ask if they can ride or steal everything or own everything. So I'll try to stay away from some of those.
Please do, because I'm still in the process of putting this together, and every question I get asked about this is incredibly valuable to me.
Oh, okay.
I'm coming at it from kind of a weird perspective. So every time I tell someone this story and they're like, well, what about this? I'm like, that's a great point, and you're not going to be the last one to ask. So let me go make some notes.
Okay, well, that's good. So I'm glad to hear you're scribbling down. Should I make the elephant bird a mount or something? But no, I'm just joking. But I'm wondering too, though. I mean, I guess maybe it's two questions, but how are you selecting the animals? Because you said you're at about 100 or so. So how are you making the selection? And then are you basing kind of the gamified or the mythologicalized, that's not a word, I just made that up, the mythic kind of creature, are you basing those on kind of legends and stories and stuff as well? So I guess that's two questions, actually. I shouldn't do that. That's a bad interviewer.
Well, so I can answer them both pretty neatly.
Okay.
It is two questions, but they flow up one from the other. Mm-hmm. My selection criteria have changed a bit over the course of the project. Excuse me. So when I started, I wanted to look at. I was motivated by reading Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, in which she posits that there have been, in the course of all of history, life on this planet, 5 mass extinctions. One of them being the so-called KT extinction event, the asteroid that hit in the Yucatan and killed all of the dinosaurs. And we are in now a anthropogenic or human-generated extinction that is on the same scale. Like, our impact on the environment is kin to hitting the planet with a gigantic mega asteroid, and completely reshaping the world in which we live. So originally, this list was just animals that had gone extinct since 1500 and forward. And I got it, I'm a journalist by training. So I got that list by doing what a journalist would do and just doing research and reading books and looking at listicles from conservation organizations of like, these are the most fascinating animals to have gone extinct. And that was how it began. Over the course of the project, I've had to be a lot more discerning about which ones I pick, because I simply don't have time to do them all. So for example, there were a few bears that I left off. Well, I'll come back to that in a second. There were some that I dropped and some that I added just because of the way research has gone about extinction. Like, some of these creatures have been rediscovered since those lists were written. And some of them, like the ivory-billed woodpecker, have actually been declared extinct since I started the project. So it's been a conversation, that list. Also, one of the really important things about it is that the history of extinction is, by and large, the same as the history of indigenous peoples or minority groups. So it's been really important to get some advice from people about which ones I need to talk about. And a lot of times when I talk about a certain animal, I have to talk about the culture that sprang up around it, and the people of the place in which it was found in the first place, or at least first described to modern science. So I'm trying to be really careful, really selective, and really picky about the animals that I put in. And it's an ongoing process. Some of it is informed by the real world history that I'm able to dig up and encounter. Some of it's informed by the game itself. I can only fit so many bears in the game because the D&D has only so many numbers for a strength score, between 1 and a theoretical maximum of 30. So we can only fit so many in there. And it's an ongoing conversation making those picks. One of the early changes that we made was adding Pleistocene megafauna or Ice Age big ones. That wasn't part of the plan from the beginning. I just wanted to be like, hey, this is happening way faster now than it ever has, and you should be concerned. But people are like, oh, you're doing extinction, so you've got a saber-toothed tiger, right? And I'm like, yes, fine. There will be a saber-toothed tiger. But it wasn't wasted time, because I found out that a lot of those Ice Age megafauna were hand in hand with the beginning of the fantasy genre itself.
Yeah.
So this is a project that's very much telling me what to include and what to leave out.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is really interesting. And and megafauna is just fascinating. Besides, talk about a whole topic. I should probably just do a podcast on megafauna one time.
That's something we should circle back to.
Yeah, because it's just awesome. But then I was asking,
I did want to answer your other question about mythologizing, because part of that process is just making them up from whole cloth. Like there's no legend that goes along with a sea mink. It's just a very big, basically a very big water ferret from the northeastern coast of the U.S. and southern Canada. So that one I made up out of whole cloth. I just said, hey, the unregulated fur trade killed this one. Now it's alive again and it wants its fur back. So good luck. So sometimes I just get to make something that's cathartic for me, or something that is drawn from the story of the creature itself. Sometimes the creature itself is a story, like the Rocky Mountain locust, which in 1857 basically wrecked the American frontier for a couple of years, and we almost didn't bounce back. And that I didn't have to do anything to make that a D&D worthy monster on its own. It's already a swarm.
Yeah.
And sometimes, on rare occasions, I get a monster handed to me, like the Japanese river otter. Lutra nippon, I think, or Lutra whiteley, depending on whose Linnaean classification you take. That one already had a yokai that was based on it. It's written into the Night Parade of 1,000 Demons. It's called the Kawauso. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I may not. I've only ever seen it in print. And that was a story that I just got to tell wholesale, just retell a story that already existed. So it's sometimes I make this up. Sometimes the story just begs me to write it in a certain way. And sometimes there's already a story that goes along with these animals. And I think that's magical.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it sounds really, really fascinating. And I can absolutely see what you mean that, sometimes there wouldn't be a lot of information, but other times, you may just get a whole story, especially it's not too surprising that in Japan, they have created a whole mythology around the creature. That's not surprising at all, based on their culture, which is interesting in and of itself. So,
in that one, I can tell you an important distinction that I've had to make in this book is not saying, the year at which this animal was first discovered. Often I'll have to say instead the year in which this animal was first described to modern science, because people have been living with these birds or with these animals for a very, very long time. And a lot of times they told each other stories about these animals that we just don't have anymore, because they weren't, this wasn't a culture with a written tradition, or they sort of took it for granted, assuming that it would always be there. So, the case of the Kawauso we got because of the Night Parade of 1,000 Demons, which is, one of the first kind of folklore, one of the most well-preserved, I think, folkloric texts to come out of Japan. So that one is down to a specific written cultural artifact that we have, and it's the reason it's survived so long.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. And then I'm also wondering, so, maybe you can give us maybe just one or two more examples really quickly to kind of get an idea. So, that you're creating stat blocks. So if you create, a creature, what is kind of your thought process behind some of the stat blocks for the normal creatures? I know occasionally I'll have a character that has a lower wisdom than a goat and different things, different things like that. So maybe could you give us a couple, if you have a really concrete example, maybe you can give us, and then I definitely want to, before our time is up, talk to you about the writing process a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, talking of goats, one of the examples that was really surprising to me was the Perennian ibex. So beasts are strange in D&D. The way that this game has parsed itself out, there are, I think, 13. Hold on, someone's going to put me on blast if I don't get this right. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 or 13 creature types, of which beast is one. So it's saying these, everything that we currently in modern day would describe as an animal fits in this game under this category. The difficulty is that those are also class features for the druid, basically. And so the game has a lot of very tight design considerations on what can and cannot be a beast. And most of them are CR2 and lower, usually the exceptions to that being dinosaurs. So very, very, very quickly, you as a player outclass everything that naturally occurs in the natural world around you, and you're into things like monstrosities, the rocks, and fiends and fays and aberrations, and the whole panoply of other creature types that D&D brings into it. So when I set about to write the story of the Perennian ibex, I kind of already had a goat ready to go. Like, D&D as a game told me what a goat was. These are the numbers and the traits and the attacks and things that mean goat. Like, you stir these things up, bake it 350 degrees until goat. So that one was fairly easy. But the Perennian ibex was, the process of mythologizing that one was really surprising, because it got so big so fast. Like, it rocketed so far up the challenge rating scale. The Perennian ibex is one of, if not the only animal to have the dubious distinction of having gone extinct twice. Let me pull this up so I make sure I tell this story right, because it is bananas. So it lived in on the Iberian Peninsula between Spain and Portugal, actually on the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France. It was basically what you'd expect of a mountain goat, around 32 inches high at the shoulder, 3-foot long horns that curved backwards, and it lived in the summer months at the bottom of the mountains, where it would graze and build up its food supply. And then during the winter months, it would grow winter coats of long buff-colored hair, and then along with the rams growing beards in that season. Like, the beard of a goat was a winter thing, which my bearded friends in the audience will attest is just smart decision making. So in the winter, they go back up to the top of the slope, and this species, its decline was slow but steady as extinction pressures outpaced the conservation efforts to preserve them. And there were many. The Spanish government took an interest in preserving the Perennian ibex, including making a national park, declaring it a protected species in 1973. They had land management plans in place to keep this animal alive, but it wasn't enough. So researchers they captured the last Perennian ibex, whom they named Celia, in 1999, and they took a tissue sample from her left ear. The following summer, Celia was found dead in the Pyrenees. Her skull was apparently crushed by a falling branch, just one of the brutal facts of life of living in a nature preserve and living the dangerous lifestyle that mountain goats tend to do. So those researchers took that tissue sample. They spent the next 10 years working with this technology called interspecies nuclear transfer cloning. Basically, they created 439 embryos from the original tissue sample. Of those, 57 were able to be implanted in surrogate mothers of related goat species, other ibexes. And of those, only 7 resulted in pregnancies. And of those, only 1 resulted in a live birth. And that newborn ibex died after only a few minutes of life due to breathing difficulties from malformed lungs. So the Pyrenean ibex became extinct in both 1999 and 2003. Or if I'm reading that right.
Okay.
So when it came time to write the creature for this, like, this could only be an undead. That's the story, a thing that came back to life after its time. Like, we have that story, and D&D calls it necromancy, which meant, and the thought occurred to me, if you're going to play a D&D game and you're going to be at high levels, there's one of 2 things that's going to kill you. It is either a dragon, sort of the brute force approach, or it's going to be a lich, kind of the most powerful spellcaster in the game. This kind of yin yang of adventuring danger. So to me, the Pyrenean ibex is the most obvious undead creature in the game could only have been a CR21 undead. So I did everything I possibly could to this thing. And now our top tier, scariest monster in the book so far, unless I find a way to unseat it, is a mountain goat.
No, that's awesome. And a really interesting story too. And I like the way you took some of the real world elements there and put them into the kind of the gamified version. That's really interesting.
And some of them were already there. Like, it had a phylactery. Phylactery being the word that D&D uses for the thing into which a lich puts its soul. Mm-hmm. We took a tissue sample from its left ear. That's practical necromancy, my friend. That's the closest we get to actual magic.
Oh. No, that's really interesting. And so I like the take on that then. Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, CR21 mountain goat. I'm going to have to throw that at my players one day.
Please do. It is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it. It sounds like it. Well, now, we've talked about the book a little bit, but I know obviously a lot of people who are listening, not only are they role players and game masters and dungeon masters, but they're writers as well. And I just want to ask a little bit, what has it been like now tackling such a project like this, for Dungeons and Dragons? What's it been like putting together a big book?
I don't think I'd be able to do it if I didn't have a good team. I wanted to do this one on my own because I thought that was just how the industry worked. So I put together the first 3 monsters in a little 12-page sizzle reel, basically, back in October, November of 2021. And I shopped it around to some people to get advice. And Mage Hand Press saw the potential in it, and they decided to pick it up and bring me on to get the benefit of their editing and their massive backlog of experience creating top tier content for 5th edition. So this experience has been very much kind of a moonshot of being able to just sort of level up from a hobbyist to as close as most people get to full time or something like it in this industry. So I don't know if that's your question. So do you want to talk about like how how this book came to be from a business standpoint, or how do I manage the writing of a 100,000-page book on a day-to-day basis? Because those are different questions, and both of them I have found to be valuable.
if you're throwing them out there, but
yeah, but there's this ecosystem of third-party creators for 5th edition, and it's mostly sustained by the open game license for that edition. So if you don't know about that already, I'll just thumbnail it briefly. A certain amount of the core mechanics of the game have been released under what's called the open game license as part of the system reference document. So back in 2016, Wizards of the Coast said, hey, here's the basics. Here's what hit points are. Here's what a wish is. Here's what a cantrip is. All of that, the nuts and bolts of playing the most basic version of Dungeons and Dragons. And you can just have that, and you can just make whatever you want with that. So from that point forward, there was this explosion of people making things for 5th edition that were really interesting and unique and according to their own independent artistic visions. So we got this huge panoply of things. And I was a part of that starting in about 2018 when I put my first adventure on the DM's Guild. I think that started in about the same year, 2016. So there became this online marketplace for third-party content that would support kind of a passive audience. People didn't have to know you in order to discover your work for the game. They just had to know the game and go to the site. So we started with 5th edition becoming a huge thing in 2016 thanks to Stranger Things, creating the open game license and the license that the Dungeon Masters Guild and One Bookshelf use in order to give people the option to do this. We got places like itch.io, and very quickly after that, Kickstarter became kind of the next phase for people who had something really cool and really big or really ambitious to make for D&D that couldn't be done on kind of a weekend basis with a Word template. So that's kind of how it came to be. And Mage Hand Press got to where it is by early on in 5th edition, converting a lot of this teetering tower of nonsense that we left behind in 3.5 and 4th edition and Pathfinder and Dragon Magazine and all of this backlog of stuff that we'd made that hadn't made it to 5th edition yet. And through their commitment to quality and their really, really intense understanding of the mechanics, they grew an audience around it, to the point where now Mage Hand Press can create things like Valda's Spire of Secrets, which is the Player's Handbook 2.0, or Dark Matter, which is their science fiction conversion for 5th edition. So like, you know what this needs? A way to play it in space and tell a different genre of it. So that's kind of a snapshot of the part of the industry that I've been living in for the past couple of years. It's been great. I've met a lot of people who wouldn't have been able to say things that who wouldn't have been able to make their artistic statements otherwise. We're able to say things that Wizards can't due to their scope or the goals of their company or the legacy of things that they have to manage, or things like the Adventurers League, like things that would never work at an AL table. We, as third-party creators, have the ability to take that swing. And I think Book of Extinction fits neatly into this. Like, I wouldn't expect Wizards to do this kind of work because they don't make historically researched, heavily cited educational content. But if they did, they'd have something really interesting. So I get to do it. And that's kind of the business model as it's been. So we're working on that basis now, and we're hoping to bring it to Kickstarter in March of 2023. And we're going to see how it goes. See how many of these books we can make and how many of these we can get in people's hands to encounter these stories and encounter a statement that's very different from the rest of what you can expect from D&D.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Of course, I create my own resources as well. So it is an amazing time to be in the hobby of tabletop role-playing games because we can do so much. And then, Yes. The other question would be, how do you just manage it? There's always people who are looking and saying, well, when do you have time to write? Because I assume you only have 24 hours in a day, like the rest of us do. So
pretty safe assumption. Yeah.
Yeah.
I structured my life in such a way that I was able to take on this kind of time commitment. And that is, I'll admit, a privilege that not everybody has. So I was able to take a swing on this partly because of Mage Hand picking it up and making it what it is and helping me do it on a timeline that would allow me to do that. So that's kind of the starter, is that in a lot of ways I got lucky. I had a good idea and it was the right idea at the right time in the right place. But I've constructed my life, my sort of personal life, and the choices that I make about how I spend my time as well in such a way that I can carve out chunks of time in order to be able to do this. But I can tell you, if you're doing a project like this, and basically any creative project, it comes down to, I think it comes down to 4 stages, which are preparation, incubation, illumination, and refinement. And this was, this is the first complete model of the creative process proposed in 1926 by Graham Wallace in his book, The Art of Thought. And, it has held true for me. So the process of writing this book, whether it's something I do in, my, in a work day, over the course of about 6 to 8 hours, depending on the complexity of this story that I'm trying to dig up and the monster that I'm trying to make, or whether it's something that you just fit into your life in the moments before in the hours before you go to work, or whether you give up some other commitment for this, however you structure the time, you have to do these 4 things, which are, first, preparation. And in my case, that means figuring out what is the story I've got to tell. It took me a long time to separate out what exactly an elephant bird was. There are 3 different genera of them, that being the classification above species. So species, genus, family, order, and so on. And also, it's not to be confused with the moa of New Zealand, which is a very similar bird, basically a ratite bird, much like a giant ostrich, but it comes with a very different geography and cultural understanding. And I thought they were the same for a while. So I spent hours parsing out which of these was which, and what are the story beats that I have to tell, and what are the accounts and the specimens that we have of it. And all that, to my mind, comes under preparation. The good part about that is that you can do that. If you don't have the luxury of doing that in a tight couple hour space, you can just do that. Like, make the choice to read about the thing you're interested in making. There's a lot of ways to get information conveniently now. Then I have to sort of think about it. I have to sit on it, tell it to some other people, and that's the incubation stage. At this point, all of my friends are tired of hearing me tell them extinction stories. But every time I do, it's incredibly valuable. So that's part of like turning these stories over in my head and figuring out which are the different ones and which are the questions that people are going to ask. Can I ride the elephant bird? Was not one that I had planned, but definitely one that I need to put in the thing. And after that, all of that work of figuring out what the story is and sitting with it for a while and letting my subconscious do the work of parsing those ideas and sorting them together. Then I can start to illuminate this, figure out, do the actual research and find the numbers that I need to put in there. How big was the egg? What year did we find this egg? What year does this sailor's account come up? When did France colonize Madagascar? All of that work. And then the last stage, refinement, is the simple fact that everyone alive benefits from good editing. Nobody in this industry publishes without an editor. That's madness. And if you can find a good one, like I did with the team at Mage Hand, you are so much better off. So the refinement process for this is someone looking at my work dispassionately and saying, "Hey, I don't get why this is interesting. Let's nail this down a bit more strongly. What do you actually want to say about the Perennian Ibex, and how do we make the thing that you've written say that thing?" So if you're doing a project of any scope, it's always down to those 4 steps. And if you can figure out a way to do those reliably, figure out a way that your research has to happen, figure out a group of people that you can incubate that research with, and then figure out times and places to both illuminate those stories and that work and refine that, whether it's through editing or playtesting, then you have the makings of a successful career in a creative industry. And at least in my case, I hope the TTRPG industry.
All right. Well, that was a fascinating answer. Thank you so much. At least we've learned you don't have a pocket dimension that you slip into and write for like 10 hours and then come back.
It does feel that way sometimes. Look at it's 6 o'clock. Oh no, I have to eat something today.
Yes. Yeah. I've been there myself. Yes. What's happened to the time? No, absolutely. But anyway, where can people find your podcast, find the Book of Extinction, or learn more about you?
Talking of incubation, I've got a project incubator for this and many, many other projects. It's called Scintilla.studio. That's SCINTILLA.studio. If you go to scintilla.studio/monster, you'll find Making a Monster podcast with transcripts, images from the game, and other little extras that the designers often give me to share with my audience. If you're interested in Book of Extinction, I hope you are, go to scintilla.studio/extinction or find Mage Hand Press wherever you can find them on the internet or on Twitter, and they will point you back to the landing page for this. The cool part about Book of Extinction, even though it is not yet available in its entirety and won't be until probably March of 2023, the first 3 monsters are out now: the Tasmanian tiger, the passenger pigeon, and the great auk, 3 of the most compelling and widely known extinction stories I could find. You can download that from my website or from DriveThruRPG. You can pay what you want for it, and every penny that we earn from that preview is going to support the work of the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a media and political advocacy organization based in Portland that does incredible work on endangered animals and wild spaces to protect them, usually under the U.S. Endangered Species Act, but also through a variety of legal and advocacy programs. They are serving as our science consultants on this book. They're checking my work to make sure that I, as a journalist and game designer, get it right when I talk about natural history and conservation. And we are really, really blessed and excited to partner with them, because when it comes to making a difference in this space and slowing or ending extinction, they're the best people I could find. They've got some of the best answers and they're doing some of the best work. So as much as extinction can be a maudlin topic or tragic at best, I want to give people hope. And the best antidote to despair is action. So if you get the Book of Extinction, you can use it to donate towards work that is going to make sure that I have fewer or no more extinct animals to write about. And that's my goal. Work me out of a job, please.
Well, that's awesome. That is amazing. A lot of great work going into this book. And for those of you who are listening, I will make sure that I put the links to Lucas's podcast and to the Book of Extinction in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So you can head over there and check those out if you just happen to miss them while you were listening. Well, Lucas, it was a pleasure having you back on the show. I think it turned into a very lively and interesting conversation, I think, or at least I hope so. And yeah, thank you so much for coming back on the show again.
It is my pleasure to be here, Matt. The backlog of this podcast has some really impressive names and names that became impressive after I listened to the episodes. I'm really happy to be a part of them.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation. As I mentioned at the end of the show, I have provided links in the show notes at dicegeeks.com. Please head over there, check it out. You can get free sample creatures from the Book of Extinction. Well worth your time. All right. Now, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get all kinds of things, including free dungeon maps and some other PDFs. Check that out. If you want to support the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. Also, If you are not in a position to support the show financially, but you still want to help out, you can also like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast in your favorite podcast player or app. Those things help people find the show, and I would greatly appreciate it. Now, I thank you so much for listening, and until next Wednesday, keep gaming!